Today's video is brought to you by Grey Viking Games. Click the link in the description below to buy mtg Arena codes for cosmetics, packs, and more. Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Jeff, and today we're going to have some fun playing Magic. Sorry, we're not playing Magic. We're actually talking about Strixhaven spoilers today, and super excited for the cards that are coming out today. I also changed up my format a little bit of these spoiler videos. I'm trying to do it in a way that makes it the most interesting for you guys. And what I want to do is, there's sometimes that common cards are better than like mythic cards, and that's the case today. Especially, there's some really powerful common cards, really powerful just cards in general, and things that we'll see a lot more play. And I figure I want to bring you guys the stuff that's the most interesting, the most relevant, while also talking about the stuff that's noteworthy and interesting. And so we're going to break this down into different segments. The good cards come first, the most interesting, the most powerful ones, and then we're going to go into like just noteworthy, good, interesting cards, and then we're just going to put the bulk at the end so we can talk about it really quickly. But that way I'm spending more time on the things that actually deserve focus. And so let's spend some focus on this next card because it is insane. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, all that stuff as well. I appreciate it. All right. Body of Research. 6 mana, 3 green, 3 blue, sorcery, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put X +1/+1 encounters on it, where X is the number of, get this, the number of cards in your library. Yes, you read that right. So by the time you have 6 mana, which is, you probably have like 40 to 45 cards left in your library at that point, you can make a 40/40 or 45/45. This is just so good. This is so good. All right, so the deck where this actually goes into already, that I think would be really easy to just jam a couple of copies of this in and have a combo, is the Temur Ultimatum deck. Already with Temur Ultimatum, you're ramping up to get up to mana for, 7 mana Ultimatum. You can play this before that if you get up to 6 and not to the Ultimatum. But even if you get to Ultimatum first, Ultimatum, you get a couple extra lands, and you go grab, you get to look at the top 5 cards of the library, maybe find a Body of Research or the other combo piece, which is Kazul's Fury. You need 9 mana to be able to do this. You need some red mana, blue and green mana, and then after you Temur Ultimatum or Genesis Ultimatum, which a lot of times wins the game anyway, then you also get to Body of Research the next turn. Play this out, have like a 35/35 creature. That's probably about where we're going to be after an Ultimatum and ramping up a bunch. Cards in your library, and then you still have 3 mana because you ramped up with Genesis Ultimatum. You also found some Kazul's Fury for 3 mana, and so then you get to just fling it with a Kazul's Fury for 3 mana with a Genesis Ultimatum. Like it already goes in the perfect deck that's already there. It's just, okay, here you go. It's just like on a silver platter. This deck, this card is awesome, and you have a win con with it now. And not only that, even if you didn't have Kazul's Fury, just hit with them in the face with a 30/30 or a 40/40, whatever you want this to be. I love this card. This is so fun. There's also the 3 mana enchantment. I think it's Garruk's Fury or something like that. I can't remember the name of the enchantment right off the top of my head, but it also just gives everything trample whenever creatures in the battlefield that are like power 4 or greater, then you get a draw card. It just gives everything trample. You can also just play this in that deck. that's just good. Give it trample. Maybe like play Perforos or something else to give it haste. Oh my gosh, this is such a good card. It's so busted. Yes, it can be balanced and it's a token, so then it just dies. Yes, the bad things can happen for sure, but you also can do so many great things. This is a sorcery card, so it goes to the graveyard, and there's ways to reanimate it. So then you do that. It's just, it's so good. I'm really excited for this card. All right, I can geek out about this one for a long time, but we're going to be doing that in gameplay before long. So again, make sure you guys like the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you know when these kinds of things come out. All right, diving into some of that stuff. Ecological Appreciation, X 2 and a green sorcery, so 3 mana and X. Search your library and graveyard for up to 4 creature cards with different names that each have mana value X or less and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. You shuffle the chosen cards into your library and put the rest onto the battlefield, and then you can exile this. So this card, the more that I've been diving into it, sounds better and better. But at the same time, there's downsides to it as well. So you could cast this for just 3 mana, and if you have a bunch of 0-costed creatures, which there are decks that might want to do something like that, you can get 4 of them out of your library or graveyard. They have to have different names, and you can cast those. Or you get 2 of them onto the battlefield, and 2 get put into the library and shuffled into the bottom of your library, right? So yeah, shuffled into your library. I'm not sure if you can ever really create a full combo with this, but you can definitely do some fun and interesting things with it. The biggest issue is that they do have to be different names. And then the other thing too is that you have to have enough creatures in a constructed deck where you actually are going to have 4 different named creatures with the chromatic cost that you're offering. So if you are going to cast this, you probably have to get it up to at least 5 before most constructed decks are going to be able to actually find creatures with 4 different names in constructed. In Commander, you could probably do some really fun janky things with this for sure. I mean, typically you're going to have more chances to ramp up the higher mana, all that kind of stuff as well, so you can cast it for a lot more. In constructed, I'm trying to decide how well this will actually work in like an arena format. And in an arena format, I'm really excited for it. I think it'll be really good. I think this goes into elves, and I think it goes into elves so that you can cast it for either 2 or 3. And for X value is at 2 or 3, because then you can go find 4 elves either in the graveyard that you've already had, and it's X or less, so you can go find a lord. Like there's a lord I think at 3 or 4 mana. There's a few other elves that are really good at 4 mana, like Skemfar Avenger, so maybe you get up to 7 mana, which with elves you can do fairly quickly, and then you just go find the best value that you can out of this. And with elves, all of them are pretty good, and you can throw them out into the battlefield, and at least you're getting the board bigger, which is what elves want to do anyway. And this is just like, okay, if I'm running out of low on cards, I can cast this with all of my mana and still get 2 more creatures on the battlefield or refill the board. Or if this is after a board wipe, we get to still refill the board with Tyvar Kill out there as well, or something like that. So that's where this card, I think, fits into standard, is probably more in the elves deck than anything else, just because I think it's harder and harder to get enough creatures. So even like the mono white decks, whatever, you only are running like two, maybe like a third, 1 convert mana value 1 creatures, and then maybe 2 in the 2-drop slot, and then maybe some more in the 3-drop slot. If you're playing really aggro, you're going to have a few more, but you're not going to have, you can't play this on 4 and find enough 1-drops to actually give them the full 4 cards. So here's the issue: if you don't give them the full 4 cards, 4 differently named creatures, then you only give them 3 to choose from. They choose 2, put those go to the bottom, and you only get 1 creature. If you only have 2 creatures that are named differently in the chromatic cost 1 slot or 2 slot that are still available to you because maybe they got extinction evented or anything like that, of course you can grab stuff from the graveyard as well, so it makes it a little bit better. But anyway, so this basically is only valuable once you get up to 5 or 6 mana. At that point, it becomes really awesome. And if you get up to really expensive amounts, then this becomes really, really awesome by grabbing Elder Gargaroths and questing beasts and all that kind of thing. At the same time, though, you also have to have enough creatures at that chromatic cost to actually be worthwhile. And you're not going to be running, a full, enough Gargaroths, questing beasts, everything that's super expensive in a deck that is going to make it really work. And so I think that I'm not exactly sure how to value this card necessarily. Put it down in the comments below. This one can talk about for quite a while, but I think I talked about quite a bit. I think this goes into the elves deck and not so much as a way to tutor up Gargaroths, all those kinds of things, because you're not going to be playing enough of those cards in the top end to make it worthwhile enough for you to miss out on maybe not having enough differently named creatures in the early game to act. So this was just kind of a dead card in the early game. I think you can break this to make it awesome, but opponent is always going to give you the 2 worst things. And so even if you're not going to be playing 5 different named 5-drops, especially if you're trying to make a combo out of it, because you might draw 2 of them and then they're in your hand and you can't get these from your hand. It only goes from graveyard or the library. And so that's where I think this can end up being an issue, is you have to be choosing the right cards, and you're probably going to get the 2 worst things regardless. You definitely are. And so anyway, we talked about that one enough. Let's dive into the other ones. Okay. Augmenter Pugilist, 3 mana troll druid, 3/3 with trample. As long as you control 8 or more lands, then it gets +5/+5. So then it's an 8/8 with trample for 3 mana, which is really, really good. We also already have a decent amount of trolls. And so just troll tribal in general sounds kind of fun. There's also a lot of druids that are coming into this one. Druid tribal might be interesting. I always go for tribal decks just because I enjoy playing tribal decks. But I also just think that this does fit the 3-drop slot pretty well. There's a lot of other good 3-drops, but some of those will be cycling out, coming into the fall. They'll be rotating out of standard, and so this actually comes in as a pretty good 3-drop. That we already had the other troll that's just better than this one, for 3 green mana, but we also get the echoing equation, the other side of this, which actually is really busted. 5 mana sorcery, choose target creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until end of turn, except those creatures aren't legendary if the chosen creature is legendary. So if you're trying to get a legendary creature's effect on a bunch of different creatures, well, you can. The first thought I had with this one is like Kranko and the mob boss or whatever that makes a bunch of goblin tokens. Just make a bunch of goblin tokens that have haste, have enough mana for an echoing equation, turn all of the other creatures into a mob boss, which each make goblin tokens, and go crazy. You can just do really busted stuff like that. So that's the first kind of thing. Like any kind of legendary creature that has an activated ability that is just really powerful, you can do over and over and over again. You can also just turn everything in standard, like if you're going to be playing just like a Simic Stompy deck, play a bunch of smaller creatures, turn them all into questing beasts, swing in, turn them into questing beasts that have counters, play pelt collectors or anything like that ends up having counters and stuff as well, make them even more busted and more powerful. And so I think Echoing Equation can actually be a really, really powerful card. I think it also could be fun to turn a bunch of things into Vorinclexes and then put one counter onto something just to see how crazy it gets. Like that sounds fun to me. So Augmenter Pugilist, I think this is less good if you're just going to go straight up mono green Stompy than the Troll, than a lot of those stuff in the 3-drop slot. But adding in Echoing Equation, if you go into like a Simic version or any other kind of crazy shenanigans, can actually become really good. Turning everything into Elder Gargaroth, even if you have like 4 creatures on the battlefield, 4 swings with an Elder Gargaroth, all the different value you get from that is so busted, so good, and really, really like it. So Echoing Equation, both sides of these are really powerful. They both work in kind of a stompier type of deck as well. So I like it. It's really fun. And even if you did end up having, 5 mana or 8 lands on the battlefield, the extra copies actually work with Augmenter Pugilist that you played out earlier, turning everything into 8/8s with trample. Pretty good stuff. I like it. All right. Conspiracy Theorist, 2 mana. Human Shaman with 2/2. I love the theme of this deck is really funny. So whenever it attacks, you may pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So you can discard a card, draw a card, and then whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you may exile 1 of them. If you do, you may cast it this turn. So it basically gives madness. The madness effect to any card that you discard, at least 1 card that you discard every turn or each time you discard a card. So just the flavor on that you get madness for all of your cards by having conspiracy theories out there. I love it. All right. Anyway, so whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you may exile 1 of them. If you do, you may cast them this turn. This is the ability that actually makes this worthwhile. So even if it attacks, you can discard a card for 1 mana. You still get to play that card, but you also can get to draw a card. So this is just a powerful effect. If you are playing, like, I'm not sure if you run this like in a mono red deck or just for value. I'm not really sure what deck this goes into. Probably something with Riel. Cycling would work really well with this. Like sometimes you want to be able to cast your Go for Blood, but you also want to cycle it. The issue is you're not filling your graveyard with it, but you still get the abilities of cycling it. So you can cycle something like a Adrenaline Stinger. You get to draw an extra card because you discarded something and you pay 1 for it. And then you also get to cast it as well. So you can end up doing some pretty cool stuff. I'm not sure if this actually works as well as cycling, but there are decks where this will work really well with it. And I think it's interesting for sure. And maybe it just comes in as a sideboard card against people that are playing discard. Of course, you can only cast it till end of turn, which means you'd have to have it for instant speed to be able to do it anyway. It's a cool card. I think it'll be fun. Draconic Intervention, 4 mana sorcery. As additional cost to cast this spell, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. It deals X damage to each non-dragon creature, where X is the mana value of the exiled card. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So this card, I wasn't sure if it would actually show up in the good card set or something a little bit lower, just because it's like, well, okay, you a couple things have to set up. You're trying to board wipe, right? You want to kill lots of things and all of their things. And this requires a little bit more of a setup. You have to already have an instant or sorcery spell that is highly converted mana cost in the graveyard. So you either have to cast it or discard it. And then to make this really worthwhile, you want to have dragons as well, maybe. Well, guess what? All of those things are actually available with this set. This does everything. Like, we have all this stuff. We have Goldspan Dragons, which already wants to be casting some spells, maybe not as expensive stuff, but we also want to be making treasures with Goldspan Dragon and the other Prismari Dragon that lets you tap down artifacts to cast instant sorceries. And then we also have all of the like Magma Opus, all the different spells that you can pay 2 mana to discard it to create a treasure token, which puts a really expensive spell into the graveyard, which means that for 4 mana, fairly consistently, you can be doing 8 damage to everything but your dragons. So that actually sounds pretty sweet. I think the only issue that you might run into this is that other people are going to be playing dragons as well. This doesn't kill a Goldspan dragon, which you might want to be able to kill Goldspan dragons with this. And that's probably the biggest issue with this, is that it also doesn't hit other people's Goldspan dragons, where Storm's Wrath does. And so that's where this is competing, is in that Storm's Wrath slot. But it can also be a one-sided board wipe if you're already trying to play those 2 dragons in the deck, other dragons maybe in the deck. Like a Jeskai dragon control deck, I think can actually be really possible and really powerful. So that's the kind of thing I'm excited to see, is if that deck ends up being a thing. And if it is, this card definitely comes in. I'm not sure if it completely replaces Storm's Wrath, but at least takes up 2 slots in the deck for sure. It's really powerful. One-sided board wipes are good stuff, and one-sided board wipes that deal like 10 points of, like Magma Opus is 8 mana value. There's a bunch of other like 7 mana value cards that you can be exiling or discarding into the graveyard. This can do really good damage to lots of things. It kills Gargaroths. All right. Strixhaven Stadium, 3 mana. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana, and then you put a point counter onto Strixhaven Stadium. So just a colorless ramp, mana rock. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you remove a point counter from Strixhaven Stadium. So a little bit annoying there. And then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter onto Strixhaven Stadium. Then if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all, and that player loses the game. So a couple things have to happen here. First off, you can't just be tapping and tapping this, tap and tap this, which in Historic, you can have like Paradox Engine keep doing that same type of thing, where you could just be adding mana value and it eventually get up to 10 point counters. And then you have to do combat damage with a creature, and then the opponent loses the game. So that's pretty interesting. I think it's a really fun thing. If anyone deals damage to you, you lose point counters from this. So I think you have to do this in some sort of combo in Constructed. If you're playing in Standard or Historic, you have to play this into a combo. I don't think that it's worthwhile to just be playing this with a bunch of 1-drops. Hit in for 10 points of damage, or hit with 10 different creatures. By that point, if you've already hit about that many times, it would have been better just to play something with a pump spell or something else to just deal 20 points of damage to their face. Will it still come into effect every once in a while? Is it still a mana, like a ramp card? Or yeah, it is a mana rock that can ramp up a little bit. So at least it's a useful card in that instance as well. I think where you want to play this is some sort of combo deck, or some sort of way with Vorinclex, where it doubles up the counters, or some sort of effect with Proliferate, so you can be getting up to that 10 as quick as possible. This definitely is more of like it'll be a fun card. It probably won't ever happen for you, but oh boy, will it be amazing when it does. And that is something to be excited for. All right, on to the next one. Leonin Lightscribe, 2 mana cat cleric with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. And it's a 2/2. So this card, anytime you cast a spell, it gives charge to all of your creatures. That seems a lot easier than other stuff. Like, what if you were casting charge? Charge is typically a 1 mana spell, and so we've already seen the rat or the mouse that was able to do this with landfall. Well, you can get multiple of these out a lot easier having it be a 2/2. So getting 2 copies of this out there is not that unlikely to have happen. Yeah, it dies to lots of things, but then you also just need to have a couple of spells. Well, this also becomes even more powerful because of Clever Luminamancer that came out the other day as well, yesterday, where it's a 0/1, gives +2/+2 anytime you get Magecraft as well. So it's just a really, really busted card. This just fits perfectly in that deck. So I think that between this and any other red spell or whatever else gives good Magecraft abilities, you can have a busted board really, really fast. I feel like this is prowess, giving prowess to everything, and so really good stuff. We already saw this in the 3-drop slot with Leonin. What is it? There was the Adeliz, the mage that had flying, and it gave all other wizards prowess basically for every time that a spell was cast, or all wizards. That this is the same type of thing. It doesn't have flying, but it's 2 mana. it's better. It's better than that because it's 2 mana. And so I'm really excited for this one. It's also a cat, which means cats have more stuff. It's also a cleric, which is really relevant. The biggest issue here is just that you have to be fitting in instants and sorcery spells into these decks. And that's where it makes it a little bit less consistent, I would say, is that these decks become less consistent. They're going to be a little bit more spiky and explosive rather than they're going to have the combo every single time, but they're going to be busted on the turns that they go off and do it. So excited for this card. I'm not sure if it ends up being tier 1, but the deck that runs this is going to be pretty dang close. It's really, really powerful. I think that Kabira takedowns, things like that are already pretty powerful cards in general for removal, they can be cast with this, make this card a little bit better as well. All right. On to the next one. I told you guys there were some common cards that are worth talking about, and here's one. Eureka Moment. 4 mana instant, draw 2 cards. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So pretty basic. It is a growth spiral for 4 mana, but you draw 2 cards instead of just 1. It's still at instant speed, and you get to put land cards from your hand to the battlefield. So growth spiral is really, really good. Enough to get banned in standard. And Eureka Moment is not as good as growth spiral because being at 2 mana is what made growth spiral so good, but I think it's just a step down. You know, like you are a lot of control decks, a lot of other decks like Soul type decks are wanting to play spells, especially at instant speed, at the 4 mana slot to draw 2 cards. There's a lot of 4 mana draw 2 cards with upside that have been played for forever. That's a card that's very common for the slot. Being able to ramp while you're doing that, especially with the ultimatum deck that's already wanting to do that. Yes. Is it better than like Binding the Old Gods? No, probably not. But is it worth running 2 of these with that? Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're trying to hold up Sot coming to stop someone else from coming off or do something else. I think Eureka Moment is a fantastic card. We'll definitely see play. Really, really good. It's growth spiral for a little bit more mana, but you also get to draw 2 cards instead of 1. So good stuff. I think this is a great card. Again, I'm not quite sure that it's not the same power level as growth spiral, but I'm not sure how much lower it is. It might be quite a bit lower or might be just barely a step down, which means it's close to a bannable card, you know, like, so good stuff. Zimone Quandrix Prodigy, 2 mana, 1/2. Also kind of feels like growth spiral a little bit here, but so it's a human wizard. 1, pay 1, tap it. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. You can do that at instant speed, so you can have this block at a 1/2. You can actually block quite a few relevant things. And then pay 4 and tap it, draw a card. And then if you control 8 or more lands, draw 2 cards instead. I'm not exactly sure where to rate this one out as well. We've already seen Frost Augur see quite a bit of play in the snow decks, just because it gets enough card advantage and everything like that. I think that ramping is sometimes even better than the card advantage necessarily just by itself, because you get to ramp into other better card advantage cards. Being at the 2 mana slot, we have seen there was the 2 mana mutate card that did the same type of effect where you can pay 1 and tap it to put a land onto the battlefield tapped anytime. And that did see play for a little bit. It was 2 mana to mutate onto something. And so that required more stuff to happen. You had to cast something on turn 1. You had to be able to mutate for 2 mana onto something else. Otherwise it costs like 3 or 4 mana. And then you had to be able to pay 1 mana to tap it and put something on the battlefield. And that was even still good by itself. This can do that just by itself. You don't have to cast something on turn 1. You can just cast this out on turn 2. And then even if you played out too many lands, you don't really care about those anymore, you can just pay 4 to draw cards, potentially 1 or 2 cards for 4 mana, which is really, really powerful. So I definitely think this sees play. I'm not sure which deck is going to want it. That's the biggest issue. I'm not sure which deck is there for it. It might be the Solte Ultimatum deck. I'm not sure, just because this can also die. That's the other big issue, is this does die to Bone Crusher Giant, which anything that dies to Bone Crusher Giant makes things a lot worse, but still good. All right. Anyway, Manifestation Sage, 4 mana, split lands between Quandrix. Whenever it enters battlefield, you create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put X plus and plus encounters on it, where X is the number of cards in your hand. This one might run more into like the noteworthy cards rather than up in the good cards. But if you can have 4 extra cards in your hand after you cast this out, that's 6 power on the board for 4 mana, which is pretty powerful stats, especially, and it's usually better to split it between 2 creatures rather than having it all in 1 creature, especially when the next turn you can play Quandrix itself out, which can, double the counters onto the fractal itself, making it an 8/8. And then it can also swing in and then give the base power and toughness to both of these creatures, up to a 4/4 at least with Quandrix base power and toughness. So then you can have a really aggressive swing after this. So this just works really well into the Quandrix deck. So if you're going to be playing Quandrix, this seems really good in that deck. So I like it for that reason. At the same time, though, maybe you top deck this and you don't have any other cards, and it gives you a 0/0 that immediately dies. That just feels bad. Even with 1 card or 2 cards in hand after this, you know, there's been 4 mana create 2 2/2s before, and those are common cards. Those are not very powerful. But as soon as you get up to 5 power with this, 6 power with this that you put out with 4 mana, it becomes much better. So I think it depends. I think that you don't play this unless you're playing the Quandrix type of effects or anything else that you like mutate or something that to work with this to be able to make that fractal creature token a little bit better. All right. Last of the main cards here. Some of the noteworthy cards are pretty awesome too, though. So anyway, Teachings of the Archaics, 3 mana sorcery lesson. If an opponent has more cards in hand then you draw 2 cards. Draw 3 cards instead if an opponent has at least 4 or more cards in hand than you. So I like this card first off because it's a lesson. It's a lesson card, which means you can have it sitting in the sideboard, and that's what makes it powerful. I don't think that you play this in the main deck. There are some, maybe sometimes you have this happen quite often, and you want to make sure that you can be drawing a bunch of cards. But it is a 3 mana, potentially draw 3 cards, especially if opponent is ahead of you. And so I think that you play this in the sideboard, and every once in a while this can be really nice. At the same time, it can completely be dead if an opponent has does not have any cards at all. Then it's just a dead card in the sideboard though, and you just go grab something else. And so I think this is definitely situational, but that's the whole point of lesson cards, is to be situational. And so that's the value I think of the lesson cards is, okay, sweet, it's situational. I will go grab it when the situation arises, as long as I have learn cards, whatever. If I think it might arise in this game, I'm going to be grabbing it into my hand so that I can use it when it does. And so I like this card. I think it's definitely a full play set, or maybe it doesn't need to be a full play set. It probably just be as a 2 of in a sideboard that we'll see play pretty often with any learned mechanics. The biggest thing I'm not sure of is how many good learned mechanics there are that actually we see play consistently just because they get lesson cards. That's the part I'm really interested to see coming up. All right, so moving on to the noteworthy cards here, just other things that are good but probably not quite as powerful. 4 mana 2/5 Elf Druid, tap to add 1 mana of any color. Typically 4 mana things that ramp are not that powerful, but it also can tap to add X mana of any one color, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn, and that can be an absurd amount, or it can be nothing at all. And so I'm not sure where to rank this one. That's why it's kind of in this noteworthy spot where it's like, okay, I don't actually think this is going to see lots of play. At the same time, you can gain tons and tons of life on a turn. There are ways to gain lots and lots of life, and then you can be casting busted spells. The issue is setting up the turn where you're going to gain a lot of life and also have a spell that can cast X mana is really, really difficult to make happen as well. So I don't think this becomes a really playable constructed card, but it's an interesting one. I think it's cool. I think it's fun. And I definitely want to try to make 20 mana with this at some point. That'd be awesome, and cast some sort of crazy X spell. But I just don't think that's going to happen very often. All right, next one, Fervent Mastery, 5 mana sorcery. You may pay 4 rather than paying this spell's mana cost. You see there's a few different cards like this that we're running into here. If the 4 mana cost was paid, an opponent discards any number of cards, then draws that many cards. So there's kind of a downside. If we cast this for less mana, they get an effect out of it. Then you get to search your library for up to 3 cards, put them into your hand, shuffle, then discard 3 cards at random. So that's the effect that happens if you just cast it for 5, is just that effect. You get to search your library for 3 cards, put them into your hand, shuffle, then discard 3 cards at random. So you can tutor 3 cards, but you might also lose them all. And so I'm not sure where to value that at. There are some cards that you want to discard it into graveyards. There are I think there's another card for like 1 mana in Modern that gets played every once in a while that's really busted and powerful, but it's just 1 mana, draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards at random. And you can play it with like Hollowed Ones. We got to see, I did a video on those just the other day, and they're powerful enough to be in Javier Dominguez's cycling Boros deck. I'm not sure this comes into that deck though. This is just not quite good enough. It's at 5 mana. If you pay 4 mana, opponent can get to discard cards and then draw cards. You could play this with Narset, where an opponent discards any number of cards, which they might draw 1 card out of this, but basically like make it less of a downside to be able to go dig through and find more things, especially if you're trying to put certain cards into graveyard, where it's like, okay, well, I want these cards in the graveyard. We're going to go find the things that I'm fine going into a graveyard, and boom, bam, done. I'm not sure if this will ever be quite good enough though, just because even if you want that effect to happen, it's pretty expensive to really combo off with. If you're trying to combo, that means that you're combo off on turn 6, which means you're behind most combos in Historic. In Standard, I don't think that you have enough. I think it's better to just be ramping up to like an Ultimatum and do better stuff with that rather than comboing off with this. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Golden Ratio, 3 mana sorcery, draw a card for each different power among creatures you control. This is also a really potentially busted card. You know, you can end up having this, you know, you can have this draw you like 4 or 5 cards, and it wouldn't be that unreasonable. Like there's been a lot of board states where you could draw 4 to 5 cards with this for the different power levels among different creatures you control. So that could be really busted. 3 mana draw 4, draw 5. Whew, that's good stuff. Or it could be a 3 mana draw 1 or 0, or maybe 2, and that's decent. You know, that's a divination. That's the biggest issue with this, is just like there's a bunch of downside if you don't end up having that golden ratio hit perfectly. You know, otherwise it is just kind of meh. You know, and so I'm not sure if I would ever risk running this one. That's not true. You guys know me. I'm going to build all of the decks and I'm going to try to make this happen because I do it so you don't have to. Subscribe. But for the most part, I don't think this is necessarily an actual good card that I would recommend people to be playing. I'm going to do it, but you shouldn't. Verdant Mastery, 6 mana sorcery. Man, these are worded so weird. So search your library for, I'm going to talk about the 6 mana version of it first, and then I'll read the rest of it. So for 6 mana, you search your library for up to 4 basic land cards and reveal them, and then put 2 of them onto the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest into your hand. That is what the 6 mana version of this does. You can also cast it for 4 mana instead. And then you would put 1 of those lands tapped under the opponent's control if the 4 was paid, and then you get to put 2 of them onto the battlefield on your side, and then you put the rest to hand. So you go grab 4 cards, 4 lands, you put 2 onto the battlefield on your side. If you paid 4 instead of 6, then you put 1 of those onto the opponent's side, otherwise put both the other 2 into your hand. Cultivate is really good because you get to put a land onto the battlefield and then draw a card and then get a land here. This is basically like the 6th, like double up your cultivate, you know, which cultivate is good at 3 mana. The issue is that at 6 mana, you're not really wanting to ramp as much anymore. We've seen Migration's Path where it's ramping up. You're trying to get the really big stuff. And maybe you are trying to ramp it at 6 mana still for some sort of combo, but I don't think it's ever worth doing this for 4 mana just to make sure that the opponent, and giving an opponent ramp can be kind of bad. You, of course, you can give them lands that don't matter. You can go grab, you know, if you're playing like 4 colors or something like this, you want to be able to go grab all the different colors to be able to, you know, fill your hand with what you need. Giving them a white source when they're running, you know, Is It or something like that could be bad for them. That might not matter if they're running ramp as well. It might not matter if you give them an extra land. But you never want to be benefiting your opponent to the point where they're ramping. Like that's a really good level for them to be benefiting, especially because they get to use that mana on the next turn, and you don't get to use this mana that came in tapped until the turn after their amazing turn, that because they get ramped just barely. So that's the biggest issue with this. I think it could be actually decent, but yeah, I'm not sure. All right, Fractal Summoning, X and 2 split mana. Hybrid mana. Hybrid mana is the way we're going to call that. All right. Sorcery lesson. So another lesson card, which is good, that sits in the sideboard. You can create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put X counters plus some custom counters onto it. Again, all these just lesson cards I think are actually fairly powerful. This is just a nice thing. It's a creature for you. If you're playing plus one counter decks that have learn effects, to go search for this, boom, bam, done. I like it. It's good stuff. Yeah, these lesson cards are really good. Fractals, I think, again, are really powerful with Quandrix. So if you're playing a Quandrix deck, it might be worth having some learn creatures in there so you can go grab this with the lesson, because I do think that it's at least, these are really powerful with the Quandrix itself. and it's powerful with any kind of mutate type thing as well, especially if you can just have this as an extra card in the sideboard. At the same time though, is it better to grab this than just using the learn effect to discard a card and draw something else? I'm not sure where to rate these ones. I wanted to at least bring this one to attention because the base level of what it is to make a fractal is what these are showing. Start from scratch, 3 mana, another lesson card. Choose one. Start from scratch, deals 1 damage to any target, or you get to destroy target artifact. So we already talked about how Abrade was 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact for 2 mana, and I think it was instant speed. This doing 1 damage to any target, it can be pretty nice. You can hit, there are some planeswalkers that go down to 1 loyalty after doing an ability. This can hit that target. You can hit their face if you want to, or you can just be destroying a target. This sitting into the sideboard with lessons is great. I don't think you ever need to have more than 2 of this. If you're playing Learn and you're in red, you put 2 of these into the sideboard, maybe more if you think there's gonna be lots of artifacts out there. But I probably would run. There's another card similar to this that does 3 damage to any target as well, but it's not a lesson. I can't remember the card but it also destroys. It can hit planeswalkers and creatures with 3 damage, and it can also destroy artifacts and I think enchantments or something like that. I can't remember all the stuff in it, but it's a pretty good card, and you run that in the main deck, and this is something you run to the sideboard. So I don't know, it's good. I think it's interesting. All right, Letter of Acceptance. You were accepted to Hogwarts. I'm sorry, Strixhaven. 3 mana, tap to add 1 mana of any color, and then you can pay 2 to tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. So this is a monolith with almost the ability of Mind Stone. If this was 1 mana to sack and draw, it would be, I would say absolutely play this, just because Mind Stone has already shown that's really powerful at playing colorless mana on turn 2. Playing colored mana of any one color on turn 3 means that if you're playing like a 3-color deck, this could actually be really powerful. Having the ability to draw cards is nice. At 2 mana to sacrifice to draw a card becomes a little bit worse, but still definitely powerful. This is not a dead card. There's a lot of other monoliths. This is, a monolith is 3 mana to add 1 mana of any color artifact. I think this is one of the best ones. Drawing cards is a really powerful effect, and Letter of Acceptance is a good one. And the flavor of getting to go to Strixhaven is so exciting. I love it. All right. Team Pennant, 1 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. It has Vigilance and Trample. And then you can equip to a token for 1 mana. So just like Short Sword that gives +1/+1 for 1 mana and equip was actually a really powerful thing. The biggest issue here is that it only goes on to tokens, but if you're playing a token deck, giving him Vigilance and Trample is pretty good stuff. With Essica, we've seen stuff like that. Otherwise, it's 3 mana to equip to anything else. Unless it's a Fervent champion, then it equips for free, and giving it Vigilance Trample on a Fervent champion is actually pretty good stuff. And so I think this goes into warrior decks. Warriors already have some token generation in general. I'm interested to see what else it would go into, but just the fact that it equipped onto tokens I thought was noteworthy and interesting, and actually I think pretty fun, potentially fairly powerful. Vigilance and Trample on a creature is actually really powerful effects. Adding what is it, Maul of the Skyclays, if you're playing multiple different equipment type cards to this is a really good turn 1 thing, and then you get Maul of the Skyclays on something else as well. You can end up having some pretty busted effects in general with this. So it's a noteworthy equipment. Because equipment was important in the last set, I figured we might as well bring it up. All right, Hall of the Oracles. A rare land that I'm not too hyped for, but it could be good. Tap to add colorless, or pay 1 to tap to add 1 mana of any color. And then you can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery, and only if you cast an instant sorcery spell this turn. So the reason why this is not, this was almost just in like the bulk stuff afterwards, because these have consistently not been very good. Like Animal Sanctuary didn't actually get to see play. Any of these other ones were just like kind of gives a small benefit to creatures that you're doing in these lands. Historically, just they've not seen much to play because they're not very good. The reason why they're not very good is because you don't want colorless mana to be able to cast all the deck that this goes into is the deck I was talking about with the Cat Cleric at the beginning of this that gives +1/+1 for every time you Magecraft. And the Lumimancer, Clever Lumimancer card. That's the deck where you want to put this into, because you're wanting to attack in with creatures. You're wanting to spend your extra land to put a counter onto a creature that's attacking and make it even better if you're casting into sorceries. The issue with why this doesn't work as often is because you typically need colored mana to be able to cast multiple spells to make that actually worth playing. So on turn 3, you play this out as a colorless mana, and you have 3 1-mana spells to cast to give Magecraft to all the different things you're trying to do. Instead of casting another spell, you're just putting a counter onto the creature, which is just worse than giving Clever Lumimancer +2/+2 or and the effect of whatever spell you're going to cast. And so having this not be a colored mana is worse than being able to put the counter onto it. And so I think you can end up running 1 or 2 of these in that deck, but it's going to be feel bad every once in a while. And then I think it could be good on the other instances. After you run out of spells, you only have one to spell, 1 to cast, then maybe having 2 of these, but 2 counters onto a creature could be really, really powerful. I think this is more powerful than Animal Sanctuary. I think it's less, but it's maybe less powerful than just having another colored land that's better, that's untapped and good. You can also just pay 1 mana to add in mana of any color. So there is a bit of mana fixing in this as well, which can be relevant in really cheap casting cost spells or creature decks. So I don't know. I think this probably runs as a 2 of in that deck. I'm not sure. That deck I think is going to be powerful enough that it's worth talking about those. That's why I wanted to kind of bring up all of my thoughts on that. Quandrix Pledge Mage, 3 mana 2/2. Whenever you cast an or copy an instant sorcery spell, put a +1/+1 counter onto it. We already got a 2 mana version of this, but the 3 mana version is redundancy, and redundancy sometimes is pretty nice. If you're trying to build a deck that has the 2-drop that does this, then why not play the one that has this as well? Probably because you're gonna be playing other better stuff with Magecraft and cast lots of spells like the Clever Lumimancer or whatever. But this lets you go into different colors. Lets you go into mono blue with it. Lets you go into mono green with it. Lets you go Selesnya. Lets you go Orzhov Azorius. White, blue. It lets you do a lot of different color combinations because of how this works. If you're trying to go with the Magecraft stuff, so I think that this is just a versatile, decent 3-drop to throw into that slot. If you're already trying to build that archetype of casting lots of spells with a few creatures to keep growing, this does fit there. It actually is pretty decent, and so might be worthwhile. Academic Dispute. By the way, if you're going to be playing these kinds of stuff, playing unsummons and bounce spells can actually be really powerful. So going into blue to be able to just unsummon and play a tempo-y type style, because the biggest issue with these cards is that they'll get bigger, but they still don't have trample unless you're going to give them trample with a spell. But so that's why I think actually going into blue with this kind of effect can be really powerful as well. All right. Academic Dispute, 1 mana instant, target creature blocks this turn. If able, you may have it gain reach until end of turn. So that means that you can force it to block a flyer if you have one, if you really want something to die really bad. And so this can actually be pretty good. And then you also get the learn, which learn effects. I think it's important to talk about cards that are actually viable that have the learn effect on it, because I think learn is versatile enough that it's good. So Academic Dispute, it's a cantrip. And the effect is actually pretty powerful. I'm not sure if I've seen as many things. We've seen a lot of target creature can't block in red, but not as many of target creature has to block this turn if able in mono red. And so that is actually pretty powerful, where typically with mono red, you're wanting to make sure that they get rid of the block, or they block incorrectly with different things. And so you can force them to block against something you know are going to throw an Embercleave onto. You can force them to lose their card advantage with the Edgewell Innkeeper by forcing it to block this turn as well, or whatever else you need to, like force opponents to not block correctly because you're making this happen on a turn where they typically wouldn't block. And so I think this actually can be a viable card. The fact that it has learn on it as well makes it like, okay, that's actually rather interesting. How interesting or how good will it actually be? I'm not totally sure, but it's interesting. All right, moving on to the rest of the cards here. Here they are. Ones that are a little bit interesting. Bottom left there, Hall Monitor can be decent. 1 mana 1/1s with haste are always somewhat interesting, and then the ability to make sure something can't block this turn in the late game is actually pretty good. So if you're trying to play a little bit aggressively and have 2 extra mana and still want certain creatures to get through but can't get through the Elder Gargaroth, well, now it can't block. Mono red is always looking for decent 1-drops, and I think this could be a decent 1-drop, but not sure if it quite matches up to other things that are already out there. And then a few other ones here. Again, not going to talk about everything too far here, but there's some interesting cards. The top here, actually, tenured and Inkcaster. Whenever it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It's 5 mana, so it's not very, very viable, but that can end up translating into lots of damage. Any of these kinds of effects, like anytime you attack, opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, can be at least interesting, probably more for limited, but it can be a fun one. There also is the vampire deck in Historic that gets to cast vampires for free. This is a 5 mana 3/3 that has a really powerful effect. There's already a bunch of effects that say whenever vampires attack in, there's the 4 mana one as well, that whenever a vampire attacks in, the target opponent loses life, or when you're attacking loses life and you gain life. Having this come out with like Sorin comes out on turn 3, plays this out for free. On turn 4, play out the one that says whenever it attacks, it does that. And then Sorin also gives a +1/+1 counter onto creatures that are attacking. So you already are going to get like 4 or 5 of these effects, maybe 6 of these effects if you played a 1-drop as well, all in that attack. So this is very possibly a turn 4 win with this card in the vampire deck. So that's the only thing that might be interesting with that one. I don't think it goes anywhere else. But anyway, that's it for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Yeah, more gameplay coming tomorrow. More Strixhaven spoilers coming out for probably another week or 2. And try to keep getting stuff out for you guys. So thank you so much, and bye-bye.